What do you think, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Elliot, you ready?
Yes.
Good evening to those watching from the UK, Europe, Israel, and South Africa. And good morning or afternoon to those in North America. And welcome to the last session in our Edgeware United Synagogue adult education program before Pesach. For several years now, the European Cantors Association has contributed to our program. And tonight, David Prager, a leading member of the ECA, will give a presentation on the remarkable Cantor Pinchas Faigenblum archive. David R. Prager was born in Manchester. He has studied the music and biographies of the cantors of the 20th and 21st centuries. He is in demand as an accompanist at cantoral concerts due to his ability to play all the most famous cantoral compositions in a key appropriate to the voice of the soloist. A chemist by profession, he pursued a prestigious senior management career and pension fund chairmanship in multinational corporations. He lives with his wife Jill in Surbiton. On a personal note, I would like to say that I am pleased that he has chosen this subject, since in the distant past, when I attended Kilburn Grammar School, I was in the same class as Pinchas's son, and there were many of my classmates who attended either Willesden or Cricklewood synagogues. You will have an opportunity to comment and ask questions at the end of his presentation.
Thank you very much. So let us immediately proceed to a screen share on the remarkable Cantor Pinchas Fagan. We start with a question. Who was Cantor Pinchas Faigenblum? What is his remarkable archive? And what are the personal connections which enable us to explore and place the archive? So, with no further ado, here is his life story. He was born in 1909 in Warsaw. The family left when he was 2 to go to Antwerp, where he had his next stage of early childhood. In 1914, the First World War broke out, and the family decided it was safer to move to London. And after the First World War, the family moved back to Antwerp, where Pinchas pursued Jewish studies and musical education. And he was part of the Yuval Quartet, which appeared on Belgian radio and concertized extensively in Belgium. His first cantorial post as a professional was in 1936 in Brussels. And in 1938, following contact with Jacob Sherman, who was a Khazan in England, he managed to secure, before the war started, by a margin of 1 to 2 years, a post in the East End of London at Nelson Street, Nusach Sfard Synagogue. The war was pretty bitter in London with the Blitz, and towards the end of the war it became even more dangerous, and he was able to secure a post in Leeds. And at this point I shout out a hello to all those viewers from Leeds who during the last week on Facebook have been interested in the various posters in the archive from his debut in Leeds. After 2 years in Leeds, he moved on to Lees's Park in Newcastle, and then we moved to the era in which most of the viewers from London with which they will be familiar, which are his years from 1948 till 1959 in Willesden Synagogue. And Spencer, who is a local expert there, has reminded me to be careful with the vocabulary about Willesden. We mean Heathfield Park when we say Willesden Synagogue in those days, which today is known as Bronsbury. 1959, he followed Chazan Schechter, who had died actually at the Omid at the end of 1958. And for more than 20 years, he was Chazan in Cricklewood. And I saw in the participants Ian Rose, who was a chassid of Chazan Faigenblum in Cricklewood and remembers the remarkable services from those days, which were at the pinnacle of perfection of musicality. He retired to Israel in 1976. He passed away in 1984. and is buried in Netanya. Now, in terms of stories which one hears from Newcastle and from his life generally, one is reminded of the Liverpool manager saying that football is not just a matter of life and death, it's more important than that. And for Khazanas, and for Khazan Faigenblum, Khazanut was his life, more or less more important than life and death. And during his time in 1940s Newcastle, his son Moshe told me that he would laboriously copy out in beautiful copperplate manuscript the recordings of the master cantors of the Golden Age. And he had a terrific collection of records by Rosenblatt, Kvartin, Hirschman, Pinchas, Reutemann, and in the boxes of the archive, which you're going to hear about, were these amazing transcriptions with minutely accurate details of each coloratura, surpassing some of the transcripts that you see nowadays. And it's an amazing collection from just that point of view alone. But let us move on to learn about the family. His father was Abraham Faigenblum, who lived from 1889 to 1942. And as soon as you see the figure 1942, you will realize that he was murdered in the Holocaust because he was loyal to his community in Antwerp, where he had worked in the fur industry, I think, and in the diamond industry, and also served the community loyally as an official, and could have left, but decided to stay with the community, and then found himself trapped and eventually deported with his wife and any children who couldn't escape, which includes the older brother of Pinchas, who you see below, siblings, Isaac, born 1908. He was also murdered in the Holocaust. And a sister was also murdered from Antwerp. And one of the other sisters had already died before the war. The other sisters either got to Switzerland or England and escaped the fate of their siblings. Mrs. Faigenblum, who married Khazan Faigenblum already before the war in Antwerp, was from the Zacon family from France, and tragically, the whole of her family was also murdered in the Holocaust. So the archive is suffused with this unspeakable tragedy of all the rest of the family left on the continent being murdered. The couple had 3 children. Moshe, who is with us tonight, was born just before they moved to England. And the 2 other brothers, Jackie and Menachem, sadly, are no longer alive. What is in the archive? Well, the answer is music books. And there were more music books, actually, rare printed books of choral compositions, which the family had already given to Tel Aviv University. But what remained in the books, which the personal connections to find this archive, which I will now speak about, comprised, this archive came to light because Moshe had been looking after it for decades. And this is music spanning back to Belgium in the 1930s, through Pinchas's career in his various UK synagogues as well. And then he went on Aliyah to Israel on retirement. And his son in London, Moshe, a dentist who had lived in Stanmore and then moved to Finchley, was persuaded by grandson David, who is also here tonight, and hello to you, David, to find a suitable fate for this archive. And David knew Noam Goodman, and Noam Goodman spoke to David about it, what to do, and then they were in touch with Alex Klein in Manchester as to what to do with this terrific collection of stuff, as it were. And Alex called me up and said, David, you live in London, I live in Manchester. Please, can you go and have a look at this thing, because it requires somebody who knows some Yiddish, who knows some music, who knows some Chazonas, who knows some Hebrew, who knows some Nusach, etc., who's got some understanding of Nusach Anglia and choral scores and cantorial history of Europe. So I had the great pleasure to meet Moshe and David at Moshe's flat and schlep these 6 boxes of things into the car. And what was in the boxes? Here you see listed on this slide, music books, and that means some small thin pamphlets, but some great music books had been in Moshe's possession of the great composers of Europe from 100 years ago. There were many choral scores, organized meticulously, carefully, stuff for Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Chanukah, Purim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Salichas, Shabbos morning, etc. Then there were these 78 recordings, some of which had been transcribed, about 100 of them. Most of them fairly common, that you and I would know about, of the famous Golden Age cantors like Rosenblatt, Pinchas, Hirschman, etc. But some of them remarkably rare because of Pinchas's trajectory from Warsaw via Belgium before the war then to England. So one of the recordings is the only copy known in the world of Moshe Koussevitzky in the 1930s in Warsaw, recording on a Sirena label, El Mole Rachamim and Mogen Avos. And the El Mole Rachamim memorial prayer that he's speaking about followed the Hebron massacres of Jews in the Holy Land. And it's clear from the text that that is exactly what he's referring to. And moving on, copy transcripts I've told you about. There were also remarkable concert posters from concerts which he had given throughout his life in various different places, and I'm going to put some on the slide in a second. There were concert programs, and for me, the first thing that I noticed when I opened the first box was his 1964 Manchester concert when I was 11. And I attended that concert, and I don't think I could afford a program after having spent the bus fare and going into town to attend. The concert was to have been given by Simon Hass and his brother Benjamin Hass, who at that time was in Liverpool, but sadly their father had just died, and they had to cancel. And the locum was Cantor Faigenblum. And I remember thinking, I wonder what this is going to be like. And then he strides out onto the stage and he sang, and I'm going to put a copy of the program on for you in a couple of minutes. And he sang so beautifully. People were absolutely happy with the organizers having made this switch. Then in another box or set of boxes were reel-to-reel recordings going back to the 1950s of concerts and services which otherwise would have been lost to history. And then there were a good number of more modern cassette tapes. So here is part of the 1964 Manchester program for Chabad. He sings, as you can see there, a variety of quite demanding pieces, one of which he had recorded in 1950 on a private label with his accompanist, Mrs. Lecker, who apparently, according to Moshe, lived round the corner from them in Willesden. And you'll see she was a brilliant pianist. And here is the beautiful musical writing of Chazan Faigenblum. And I'm going to play on a v'choach. Terrific. Very sophisticated singing. So, why is the archive unique? The answer is, he had a unique personal trajectory, coming to the UK, escaping the Holocaust before it happened, and bringing his personal possessions with him. And he'd come from Poland through Belgium to the UK. And in Belgium, in one of the interviews that he gave to Elie Delibes, who was a cantorial expert in London, he speaks about an early experience, and I think it must have been 1929, when he was about 20, that the famous Gershon Sirota came from Warsaw for Shavuos to Antwerp, and choirmaster was a Russian choirmaster who had just arrived from Odessa called Gantman, and Gantman put together a choir of a few voices to accompany Sirota in a hall for Shavuot, and Faigenblum, as a young man, had the experience to practice for a day or two with the great Sirota, and he was absolutely massively impressed by not only the vocal prowess, but the musical prowess, the religious prowess of Sirota. He said that the musicality of the man can't be imagined. And then he had his formal musical education, he had his formal Jewish education, and on top of that, he had a natural gift of being granted by God a beautiful tenor voice, comfortable up to top C, which you will hear in some of his recordings. He was known as a Talmud Chochem, as a Baal Nusach. He knew what tunes to apply for what occasion. And differently from many lesser musical cantors, he was super competent in writing music. Moreover, in the early era of the tape recorder, which came in the 1950s, he was technically savvy at getting on tape the various concerts of the choirs and the concerts that he went to or that he participated in. And he was lucky in that he had top-class conductors of his choirs. He had Gantman in Belgium. His brother-in-law was Heilman, who was later famous in Haifa. He had in the UK from the late 1940s onwards Martin White, who Moshe Faigenblum tells me he met one foggy November night after a concert in Bronsbury and persuaded him to become his choir master in Willesden. And they had a wonderful partnership from the late 40s until 1957, when Martin White went on Aliyah. And later on, he continued his relationship with the London Jewish Male Choir, which had begun earlier in the White days. And you will hear Emmanuel Fisher conducting the London Jewish Male Choir at the memorial service for Martin White in 1966 in Cricklewood Synagogue, when Martin sadly had passed away at the age of 65 or 66 while conducting as guest conductor in Johannesburg. So Chazan Faigenblum also, besides the Sirota story which I told you about, he became friendly with the Kusevitskis and later Leo Brill in London, and was part of a crowd of the leading cantors of the day in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. Three of the Kusevitsky brothers had posts in London at the same time as he had. Leo Brill was appointed to teach Chazanot at Jews College in the 1950s. And Brill conducted the Khazanim choir, which was a group of 45 voices, mainly cantors, but some ringers brought in for the baritone and bass section especially. And Faigenblum wrote out by hand, in the days before photocopying being so cheap, all the musical parts for all the choristers in the Khazanim choir. And you're going to see a picture of the Khazanim choir later on in the presentation, and you're going to hear what that Khazanim choir sounded like. So not only did he have these skills that we've spoken about, but he also was a dedicated collector, and he had an organized collection of the various cantorial memorabilia which impinged upon his career. And these were all present in the boxes. And finally, he was an accomplished concert artist and popular pastoral minister. So that combination makes the archive unique. There are not many people who could put together such an archive. And then the family kept it for years and years, sacredly safe, to such an extent that the tapes, which are nearly 70 years old, could be played by electronics experts who were friends of ours today. Here are four of the posters, and there are more. The one on the left is from the Yuval group in Belgium before the war. The blue one is on his appointment in Brussels as Cantor. Those who are good at reading Yiddish will see that the big letters in the middle say Größer Concert, Pinchas Faigenblum. The one slightly on the right is a remarkable concert poster from London, and it tells you that the famous Grove Lane Shul is already now in Lampard Grove, because those who know Stamford Hill will know that Grove Lane was renamed to Lampard Grove. And there they had a concert during the war to remember the famous Khazanim of the Golden Age who had passed away in the years preceding that. So this concert was in memory of Zadel Rovner of Russia, Yossel Rosenblatt, who had died on a tour of Israel in 1933, Reutemann, who died in the early 40s, as had Mordechai Hirschman, who top class famous. Next class famous, you get David Moshe Steinberg and Elias Kretschmar. Anyway, they were all remembered in this concert of 1943, organized by the Association of Federation Chazonim in London, because in those days, Faigenblum was at Nelson Street before he joined the United Synagogue. And in Leeds, to which he moved in 1944, you see a 1945 recital of Jewish songs. Moving swiftly on, I'm going to play you a remarkable record, which is rare, which is in the collection, which is beautiful, maybe one of the most beautiful recordings that is in the whole collection. Slutsk, Mein Städtler, which is not such a famous song. People know about Bell's Mein Städtler, but they don't know so much about Slutsk, Mein Städtler. And having heard this, I was curious to find the sheet music, which I did. It was in the Florida Atlantic University collection, and they were kind enough to copy it and send me the manuscript, which you see pictured on the slide here. And so they were pretty on the ball, actually, in Belgium before the war, because this only came out in the 1930s, and already in the 1930s, it's on one of the programs of one of his Belgian concerts. And here he's singing it with his sister, Leah Dubinsky, in a phenomenal duet. Speaks about guests coming for Friday night, back in the old days in the shtetl.
People
sounds to me better than the Malawskis almost. Fantastic. Right. Let's move on to the Khazanim choir that I spoke about earlier. And following the finding of this collection, and indeed the 1955, probably last concert, I think, of the Khazanim choir of 45 voices, the program was tucked neatly inside one of the tape boxes, and you can see a photocopy of the list of members of the Khazanim choir from that program, and the officers of the choir, and the date and place of the concert. And one of the soloists was Reverend Taylor of Dollis Hill, whose son is Stuart Taylor, who gave me this photograph from that concert. And there you see on the right, Abraham Rosenfeld, next to Pinchas Faigenblum, next to Harold Taylor. And with a baton in his hand in the middle, near the podium there, is Reverend Brill himself. Far left, easy to recognize, is Jerry Fagan of Edgware. And in the middle under the clock, if you've got sharp eyes, you'll be able to see Mayor Lev, who later on was in Wembley. But earlier, one of the soloists at the choir was a predecessor of his at Wembley, who left for America. This is cousin Louis Klein, who went to America in 1956. And the Jewish Chronicle lamented the brain drain to America of Khazanim, because by then the three Kusevitsky brothers had gone. And I see in the list of participants Mrs. March, who is the granddaughter of Jacob Kusevitsky. Well, he had gone in the early 1950s. And now, in 1956, the Jewish Chronicle was lamenting that Reverend Klein, a highly competent cantor, was going. And we're going to hear his solo in Matovu, but not the Matovu that you and I normally would recognize. But the concert program says this is Matovu by Shor. And this was published in 1906 by Shor's son. And you see a photocopy of the music there at the bottom right of the slide. And if I click on the sound file, you will hear the Khazanim choir on a tape preserved by the Faigenblum family for nearly 70 years of the 1955 concert. And the opening number was Matovu with Louis Klein, who had a beautiful baritone voice, lyric baritone with a decent range. And he is the voice you will hear in the middle of this piece. I'm going to try and kick it off like this. Right. amazing bringing that back to life. We don't want to hear it twice. I mentioned before the memorial service for Martin White. And here is the piece of paper that was tucked in the tape of the memorial service for Martin White, held in Cricklewood Synagogue in 1966. And besides all the musical archives, there was also a correspondence archive, which is not part of the archive, let us say. The letters between Martin White, after he'd gone on Aliyah, to his bosom pal, Faigenblum, in London. And this covers the era of the remarriage of Martin White and the birth of his two children, who he writes had unusual Israeli names, which his Israeli wife insisted upon, Oria and Gal Ale. And since finding the archive and looking through it with a fresh eye, together with Moshe, we made contact with, because of their unusual names, Oria and Gal Ale in Israel. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a three-way phone call with Gal El, Moshe, and myself, and hopefully we'll be able to meet up in Israel in the not too distant future. Anyway, here is the service. And you can see it's a glimpse of old Anglo-Jewish musical prayer for a memorial service comprising most beautiful items. And one of the most unusual items is the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim, for which the London Jewish Male Choir chose the composition by Ansis with Khazanim Faigenblum as soloist. And El Malei Rachamim is always for Khazanim not necessarily such a simple matter to conduct with aplomb, because there's a tendency to repeat phrases, and because it's medium long, to get to the end with forward movement and interest and moving emotion all the time is not so easy. But here you see a master craftsman at work, or more than one master craftsman at work, the choir, the conductor, and the cantor in Ansis's El Malei Rachamim. So let's see if we can play it. just wanted to put one page of a 1960s London Jewish male choir program up, because there you see at the bottom of the top right-hand column the name Reverend Peter Faigenblum, and he is the musical research and archivist officer of the London Jewish Male Choir. And I was told that this was because of his terrific collection of music, and by making him the musical research and archivist officer, then Emanuel Fischer was able to access, in those days of difficult to find Jewish music treasures, some veritable treasures from Khazanim Faigenblum's collection. Now, how are we going to make the archive accessible? So, being a scientist, I thought I would sort it into different types of things. First of all, manuscripts. What do you want to do with them? Answer is digitize them, scan them. Who can best do that and make them available to the public? I thought the National Library of Israel. Question is, would they accept this particular archive as being special? And after a short conversation with the National Library of Israel, indeed, they were persuaded that it is a special collection meritorious of being included in their catalogue. So they very generously arranged for a courier to collect 3 of the boxes which contained the choir and cantor solo manuscripts, and that was manuscripts and music dealt with. Next one, reels. Reels of old tapes are not so easy to play nowadays. Sometimes they're stiff. Anyway, who's got a reel-to-reel player in 2022 it was then? And the answer was a friend of mine, a chassid in New York, Akiva Mittelman, and he is a genius at making play such old things. And you heard in the Khazanim choir recording of Matovu the fruits of his work. So he has recorded all the tapes that were included in the boxes, and they are now available and maybe could be published as some rare examples showing a glimpse of Anglo-Jewish musical talent of the mid-20th century. The concert programs, I thought, having photographed them, no reason not to give them back to the family, so they're retained by the family. The 78s and the cassettes, the rare ones needed to be digitized. The common ones are already online. So the rare records have been generously given by the family also to the National Library of Israel, who has also redigitized them as well. And the common 78s have been given to the Jewish Music Institute, which has a terrific collection of such things. And the concert posters, again, you've seen them tonight, pictured, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be retained by the family now that they have been digitized. We're moving swiftly on to the last couple of slides. The archive has been great as a solver of mysteries. In recent years, you see Yossi Muller there from the north of Manchester. This is the picture that goes with his Misha Beirach recording. But people didn't really know who had composed it. Was it Meyer Posner, the famous East European via London to New York chap who died young in the 1930s? Because his music was maybe similar to the source of this one. There is an old Misha Beirach recorded by a boy, Wunder Cantor, in the early part of the 20th century with a very similar theme for Misha Beirach. But here you go, in Martin White's handwriting, Misha Beirach Shretter, arranged for cantor and choir. And this is, if you can read music and you listen to the beginning, I'm not going to play the whole lot because we haven't got time, but is Yossi Muller. You can listen to that on YouTube because you'll have more time then. So that's one mystery solved. And Shredder you can look up. He was born in Hungary and he went to New York and he died in the 1940s. And he was a great chazan and arranger of music. And another one which is close to my heart, because I used to sing in the Manchester Jewish Male Voice Choir, and we used to sing this terrific Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis, Psalm 30. In London nowadays, mostly people sing the Oscar Julius one, which seems to have less imaginative musical ideas than this piece. And I thought as a kid, this is special. Somebody great must have composed this. And if you look up Zadel Rovner, who was a Cantor composer in Russia over 100 years ago, even senior Russian army officials used to listen to his choir, especially with their concerts of compositions around the Psalms, because he had special imagination, really good for the Psalms. And here is, and it's sad to see Adrian Isaacs conducting this because he passed away just recently, but the Manchester Jewish Male Voice Choir with Chazan Hillman singing Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis LeDavid in this tune, which I recognized from my music and now see in the archive. There's a photocopy of what's in the archive there. Psalm 30, music by Zadel Rovner, and the tune is exactly the same. It's written in a slightly different key from what we used to sing it in, but it's exactly the same. So it's a pleasure, having asked all the big Mavinim of the world, who was the composer of this piece that was sung so often in Manchester and sung also at one of the concerts that Alex organized in Manchester with the Leeds Choir. And none of the great composers of cantors that I asked over the last 20 years knew who it was. And lo and behold, just delving in the box, one sees this. So for those who don't know what this particular piece sounds like, here's a few snatches of it. I think we'll move it towards the end so that we can. So lyrical deep parts as well, and let's have the march at the end. The film says the end, and it is the end. So I'll stop my screen sharing now. And back to Spencer.
Right. Well, I did say at the beginning that if anyone has any comments to make or any questions, please raise your hand, your virtual hand. Would someone like to talk about their days in Cricklewood or Willesden or that area? Well,
Was that Moshe smiling and raising his hand at that moment? You're on mute.
Okay, I'm not on mute now. That was fantastic. I mean, it brought tears to my ears, particularly hearing my father and my auntie Leah doing the Slutsk duet. All I can say is my father, Ola Sholem, he had made the collection. I had them in my office or my room at the top of the shelf. I didn't know what to do with them, and at one stage I thought I'd try and copy them out, and I don't know. Anyway, it was obviously impossible. I'm a dentist, not a musician. I was a dentist, not a musician, and I'm so happy that we found you and you found us, and you were able to make this remarkable transference to Yerushalayim and to the digitization of those. I mean, those tapes, which goes 1955. Once I tried to play with them, but I only had an old Elizabethan thing, and it just wouldn't do it. It was not the right speed, and I couldn't do it. And I just thought, it's going to be lost. It's going to be lost. How is going to be able to hear it? And now, thank God, we heard it from through your genius in America. And so it's something which is we can all enjoy and look back and see where Khazanim used to be. I mean, now I look around the London, look around England, and we say, there's some very nice Khazanim and very Baal Tefillos and so on. But the idea of Khazanim as a profession and the inspiration that Khazanim gives to communities, it's being lost. I mean, they say, why do we need Khazanis? We've got Israeli tunes which we can sing, if at all, above the talking. So I don't think we're going to get a regeneration that's going to regenerate Khazanis in this country, but at least it gives us a taste of what it used to be like. So I'm really, really grateful to you. I've said this many times. You're a genius, and I think no, there's no question about it. You're a genius, and a deep well of information. Every time I speak to you, you bring up ideas and things people I wouldn't even dream of talking about. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I am so grateful for Moshe Faigenblum and for David for sending me this wonderful email at the beginning of all this and to see the results. And I'm also grateful for my dear friend David, who he was the only person I could ask and rely on to do a tremendous job, because to find somebody who could read music, understand the script, the nusach, and appreciate what this beautiful find, and then the connections that we had in the Israel National Library, through the ECA, through our different branches and our academic wing. So through making contacts around the world, people appreciate that, and through these contacts we can, Baruch Hashem, preserve what is needed to preserve, the wonderful chazanas of the 40s, 50s and 60s in London, the old times of Reverend Brillet Jews College, and where I as a boy used to schlep. I used to live in Golders Green, and we used to walk to Hendon Shul, to Edgware Shul, to Bronsbury Park, to Dollis Hill, and it wasn't, it was miles and miles and miles, but to hear a good chazan on the Shabbos, you had the pick of all the shuls. And as Morris quite rightly said, it's something is lost, and it's not, it's what the public actually wants it, but it's taken away from them, because I believe, and like a lot of my people believe, they have no choice. But if you actually vote with your hands and your mouths, we may be able to resurrect something. Otherwise, it will be lost forever. But this is the way forward, and to preserve and to listen and to remember the wonderful past and the wonderful chazanim we have. thank you so much for allowing us to have this collection and to allow us to preserve it and bring it into the public domain. Thank you once again from my heart.
Benjamin Meisner, did you have your hand up?
Benjamin Meisner, we're honored to have cantorial royalty with us tonight from Toronto.
I won't speak much. I just want to tell you that I came especially back. I should have never retired because I work now. I maybe look for a job to rest a little bit. David, you are a walking encyclopedia. I thought I knew a lot, but you are unbelievable. But because of you and Alex and my connection with your community and my participation with the European Cantor Association, I just finished a very important and significant schedule lecture, the Canadian Cantorate of yesteryears. And I found that Schlisky started in Toronto, in Canada, and I researched Winnipeg and everything, and only because the Cantor Assembly and Nusach has become so much important. I must tell you that since I retired, I only go to Orthodox synagogue, and to my pleasant surprise, Nusach, not with high notes like Kusevitsky and the Schliskys and Sirota, but Nusach is alive in Orthodox synagogues, at least in Canada, at least. But I enjoyed it because we learned so much from each other in the last couple of years that it's amazing. Really, it's amazing. So
thank you very much.
I greet you all for a happy kosher Pesach, and let's pray. More important than Nusach, let's pray for our people in Israel and for diaspora Jews as well.
Amen.
Maybe at some later stage you'd like to talk about Nusach and Chazanot in Canada. Morris, could I ask you, did your father continue with any voice training, and did he train other people?
He certainly did. I mean, I wasn't really very much involved in it. I always remember once we were in holiday in Margate, I think it was, back in the 50s. Yes, could have been the 50s. And I went with him down to the beach. I was just a little boy. And he stood on the beach and he let fly a top C. And I was amazed because there was nobody around there. But I looked at him, I said, why are you doing this? And obviously he did it because he just felt the freedom of the air, and he could do it without any trouble. That always stuck in my mind. As far as students concerned, I was aware that he saw students, but by that time I think I'd left the home, and so I didn't know. But he certainly had students, so he tutored.
I used to go for a schmooze with the late David Katanka, who is about my age, and he, when he was at Jews College, for Nusach, he went to private lessons with your dad.
Yes. Well, he
had tapes of Nusach from him.
Yeah. He certainly was a stickler for Nusach, how it should be. And I had some tapes which I went to him when I was acting as a Baal Tefillah in Kenton. And I went to him and I said, Dad, can you give me some instructions? So I put on the tape recorder, and I said, I don't want any chazonos. I took to my father, I can imagine, I don't want any chazonos. Just give me a straightforward nusach, which he was able to do.
Tell me, since we're approaching Pesach, what were your Seder nights like?
Joyful. We had our own tunes, obviously. It's going back a long time though now. I think my brother Menachem, I don't know if Menachem's on the screen has joined us, but he had been to Israel, and when he came back, he was no longer keeping the second day. So he made a recording of the Seder, the second Seder, which I have somewhere. I've got to be able to play it. But it was we had our tunes, and it was very joyful. It was very joyful.
Does anyone else want to say anything? No. Well, in that case, let me just say that we restart our next biannual program on Tuesday, the 2nd of May, when there will be a daytime tour of the Wiener Holocaust Library. And this will be followed on Tuesday, the 16th of May at 8:30 by Professor Irving Taylor, who will give a presentation on medicine in biblical times and beyond. The next Cantoral session will be on Tuesday, the 30th of May, when we welcome back the European Cantors Association for a session entitled From Our Lips to God's Ears, the Role of the Shliach Tzibur and the Power of Music in Jewish Prayer. We are hoping shortly to add the complete new biannual program to our website, which is www.edgwayu.com, or alternatively, contact our office@edgwayu.com, and ask to be placed on the circulation list for the adult education program. Recorded past sessions are on our Edgway US YouTube channel, and this session will be added shortly on YouTube. It remains for me to thank David for his wonderful in-depth presentation and for introducing us to the massive archive of one of the great UK Khazanim. It certainly took us back to an era when cantors and cantoral music were given the appreciation that they deserved by their congregations. And thank you to all those who attended from America, Canada, Poland, Israel, and several other countries. I wish you a Chag Pesach Chashev Sameach, and look forward to you participating in all or part of our future program.